Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Nur binti HEDZIR and my teammate Mama AIDIL, Haris, Mama HAZIM bin ANUAR and SABRINA binti NORUDDIN. So for today we would like to present about HACCP plan. Okay, next is introduction. HACCP is recognized worldwide as the most effective managing system in the food safety. Is addressed through the analysis and control of biological, which is microbe and toxin, chemical, physical, hazard in food manufacturing, storage, distribution, and the consumer consumption. Next, HACCP system in the food organization means control over stage of food manufacturing from the processing raw material, grinding, mixing, packaging, labeling and storage to consumer handling in order to ensure the food safety for consumption. Next, the objective of this project is to develop HACCP plan for frankfurter chicken sausage product. Okay, next is food products such as sausage resulting from the accumulation of proper ingredients in the right proportion that's joined with structure, design and control process. Okay, next is the requirement for the quality of sausage must be taken consideration in terms of every material in making sausage, chicken sausage. It should define all the physical, chemical and microbiological requirement. The heat and leftover cut may be used from the fresh and high quality meat such as chicken, lamb and beef. The principle and idea behind the modern day sausage manufacture in achieving product of high organoleptic value, improved shelf life remain the same even though the size and scope of operation have undergone a remarkable level of change. FAO 1985. Next, the product may be wrapped in the glass, impermeable plastic and placed into the refrigerator storage or display. The specific packaging will vary according to the need of the end user. Next, the processor must follow hygiene standard when the packaging any sausage product to avoid contaminating the product. Okay, next is the organization chart of HACCP team and the responsibility. For this project, AIDIL Haris as the main general manager and Mama HAZIM bin ANUAR as a quality assurance officer, SABRINA binti NORUDDIN as a product development and production, and NAJWA is me as a store distribution and purchasing. Okay, next is the schedule of tasks and the responsibility. Okay, for position general manager, the responsibility is to hiring and training employees. Next is improve efficiency and increase profit. Next is control day-to-day operation by scheduling. Okay, next for quality assurance officer, the responsibility as a quality assurance is monitoring and control the production process, inspecting and testing product. Next, ensuring all the quality policy and procedure meet national and international standard. Last is managing a team of quality technician and ensuring consistency of approach from the team. Next, for product development and production, the responsibility as a product development and production is increase revenue and satisfy customer changing demand. Next, manage the process of developing a product. Last is manufacturing, operation and process. Last, for store and distribution and purchasing, the responsibility as a store distribution and purchasing is identify requirement for good material and service. Next, identify reliable supplier. Next is price negotiation. Next, comparison of delivery terms. Last is establish order quantity. Okay, next is product description. Okay, for the product name is Frankfurter chicken sausage from brand Ramly. The origin of Ramly brand is from Malaysia. And product characteristic, for appearance, the sausage is similar like cylindrical, and the aroma of sausage is like chicken meat and raw small. For taste is like spicy, salty, little raw, and similar to pepperoni. For texture of sausage, like crumbly and little dry. And the pH of sausage is about 5.1, which is acidity. And the water activity is starting from 0.76 to 0.87, which is lower water content. Next is intended use for normal consumption. The target for consumer is general, so all customer can eat and buy the sausage. For the process step is we will starting from receive raw material, and then baking, grinding, mixing, which by using temperature below 10 Celsius, and then forming, baking, cooling by using 0 until 4 Celsius. Packaging, labeling, and storage. For storage, we use the temperature between starting from negative 18 Celsius. Okay, next is raw material list. Okay, is chicken meat, modified tapioca starch, soya protein, spices, salt, sugar, food conditioner, MSG flavor, and permitting coloring. Okay, next is packaging size. Okay, the packaging of sausage product is 340 gram times 10 sachet times 1 bag. Next is packaging material. For primary, we use plastic bag. For secondary, we use carton box. Next is storage condition. The customer need to keep the sausage frozen at negative 18 Celsius. For shelf life of sausage, the shelf life of sausage is starting from 9 to 15 months at the refrigerator temperature, which is 4 Celsius or below. The labeling instruction for consumer: the consumer must keep the sausage frozen at negative 18 Celsius. For distribution condition, the truck body must be certified sufficiently insulated to prevent the transfer of heat, humidity, or dirt from the exterior. The truck can be refrigerated with ice, dry ice, of mechanical equipment.
Next is process flowchart for Frankfurter chicken. So here I want to tell about the process. So first step is we need have raw chicken breast. Second step is receive. Third step is weighing. Before we going to the grinding step, we have fat chicken, and then we need to receive and weighing. After that, we can go to the process grinding. After we going to process grinding, we need to mixing, like temperature below 10 Celsius. In mixing process, we have starch, phosphate, and other spice. And then after that, we need to receive and weighing. The next step is we have soft fiber protein, and then we receive. After that, we weighing and soaking like normal temperature water for 1 hour, and then we rinse and dehydrating, and after that we beating. The two process, like I said that in the mixing, temperature below 10 Celsius. After we proceed mixing, we going to the foaming. After we going to foaming, we go to the baking in 55 Celsius in 40 minutes. After that, we go to the cooling process 0 to 4 Celsius. After we go into the cooling process, we go to the second last step is packaging and labeling. For the last step in this process flowchart is we need to go storage like negative 18 Celsius.
Next is hazard analysis assessment. Okay, in this part, there are 9 process steps that has been listed. The purpose of this analysis was created is to determine whether the process is CCP or not CCP. In this analysis, there are 3 potential hazards in each process step, which is biological, physical, and chemical hazard. So for first step is receiving raw material. So their potential hazard has a biological, physical, and chemical. So we go through one by one. For first is biological, which is contamination from microorganisms, food handlers during receiving, or from pest infestation on damaged product. So the source of hazard during the step is all approved suppliers are subject to agree specification. Handlers are trained to handle ingredients with care. So next is to determine whether this potential hazard is significant hazard. We use a significant assessment matrix to determine their severity and likelihood, and also their score to know this process is significant or non-significant. Next, for their preventive measure or control to prevent the significant hazard is visual inspection, like person training. So this next part is important point, which is we determine whether this hazard is CCP or not CCP. We use a question by CCP decision tree. Based on that, we can tell that this process is CCP or not CCP. Next, physical contamination from stones in a soil fiber. So their source of hazard raw materials have stones, which is identified as fragile metal. Their severity is 4, and likelihood is D, and their score is 21, and this identified as non-significant. So their preventive measure is inspect raw material and food ingredient for field contaminations, such as stones in chicken meat that were not found during receiving. So this step is CCP. This step also not a CCP. So next is chemical. Which is ban additive or excessive use of control additive. Their source of hazard or justification. All approved supplier are subject to agreed specification. Their severity is 4, likelihood is D, and their score is 31, and as identified as non-significant. So for their preventive measure, supply hazard assessment, microbiological or chemical analytical form, which is we drew a form about microbiological or chemical analytical. So is this process is CCP? This process also not a CCP. So next process is swagging. So in the swagging process, there are no potential hazard. So we move to next process, which is grinding. In this grinding process, we have 2 potential hazard, which is biological and physical. So for the biological, which is contamination from food handler that does not use appropriate PPE to handle the material. So for the source of hazard is failures from employers that does not provide appropriate PPE to their employees. So for their severity is 2, likelihood is D, and there has score 12, so we identify that this process is non-significant. So for their preventive measure, before starting work, the employee will check the employees to make sure that they are wearing PPE. So this process also determined as non-CCP. So next is physical, which is contamination from rust that found on the grinding machine. So their source of hazard is the grinding machine does not clean properly after use. So for the severity, this hazard got 3, and their likelihood is D. Their score 17. So this also identified as non-significant. So for their preventive measure is establish a daily inspection for the equipment in the facility to avoid source of biological hazard. So this process also determined as not CCP. So for the next step of process, which is mixing, like temperature below 10 degrees Celsius. In this process, there are two potential hazards, which is biological and physical. For biological, which is poorly handled food and through contamination from microorganisms at temperature above 10 degrees Celsius. So for their source of hazard is carelessness of the employee handling the mixing. So for their severity is 3, likelihood is got C, and their score is 13 and also identified as non-significant. For their preventive measure, we put a machine procedure step for employee reference. So when we put a instruction, this will ensure the hazard to become worse. So this also analyzed as not CCP. So for physical, which is contamination from metal part that fall off in the machine. So for the source of hazard, does not have an operator to monitor the machine. So their severity is 4, likelihood is D, and this process gets score 21, also identified as non-significant. So for their preventive measure is establish an effective maintenance program for the equipment in the facility to avoid source of physical hazard. So which is this process also identified as not CCP. Furthermore, for next process is forming. So in this forming process, there are one potential hazard, which is biological. In biological, microbial growth, which is contamination from food handler that does not use appropriate PPE to handling material. So for their source of hazard is failures for employer that does not provide glove to employees during forming process. So their severity got 2, likelihood is D, and for their score is 12 and is identified as non-significant. For their preventive measure is employers conduct a daily inspection to ensure that employees are always wearing gloves during forming process. So when the preventive measure has done, so this process determined as not CCP. So next step is baking, which has also one potential hazard, which are biological, like microbial growth, which is growth of surviving microorganisms under low temperature. So for their source of hazard, inappropriate time and temperature. For their severity is 2, likelihood is B, for their score is 5. So this determined as significant. For their preventive measure, we use a thermometer at appropriate time during baking process to ensure that microorganism not active. So this process also known is identified as CCP because tak semua cara macam kita boleh guna thermometer je untuk hapuskan microorganism, sebab kita tak boleh matikan microorganism dengan thermometer, kita hanya boleh mencegah saja. So for the next process is cooling. So in this cooling process also have one potential hazard which is biological, which microbial growth that like insufficient high temperature and time control will result in microbial growth. For the source of hazard is inappropriate temperature. Their severity is 4, likelihood is got C, and their score is 18. So this identified as non-significant. For their preventive measure, we use a food control technique to prevent temperature from getting too high that can cause bacterial growth. So this identified as not CCP.
Okay, for the next process step is labeling and packaging. So the potential hazard for this step is chemical hazard, that is contamination from packaging material that contains a certain chemical substance that can affect the food. So the source of this hazard is packaging material that's not suitable for food product. The severity for this hazard is 3 and likelihood is C. Therefore, this step is not a significant hazard. So the preventive measure or control that we can apply on this hazard is all packaging material are supplied by approved supplier, and this step is not a CCP. Okay, so for another potential hazard that we found in this step is biochemical hazard, that contamination of microbial growth on the packaging surface. The source of this hazard is the packaging was done at controlled or clean environment. The severity is 3 and the likelihood is D. Therefore, this step is not significant hazard. Okay, for the preventive measure, always make sure that packaging surface is clean and has been sanitized after use. This step is also not a CCP. Okay, for the last one is storage. The potential hazard that we found on storage is biochemical hazard, growth of surviving microorganism under normal temperature. The source of this hazard, microorganism can grow under normal temperature or high temperature. The severity is 2 and the likelihood is B. Therefore, this step is significant hazard. So preventive measure or control that we can apply in this step are daily inspection on the temperature storage. This step is a CCP. Another potential hazard that we found is physical hazard, that is contamination from rack that used to put the product is broken. And the source of this hazard is product has been fully packaged. The severity is 5 and the likelihood is B. So this step is not significant hazard. The preventive measure that we can apply is repair or change the rack, and this step is not a CCP. Okay, so the last one potential hazard that we found is chemical hazard, that is contamination from chemical substance. The source of this hazard is chemical substance were stored together with food product. So the likelihood is the severity is 2 and the likelihood is D. So therefore this is not a significant hazard. The preventive measure or control that we can apply is chemical substance stored in suitable area according to GMP. So in this step is also not CCP either. Okay, next we will talk about CCP decision tree. So what is decision tree? So decision tree is used to decide whether the step or process is CCP or not. So as you can see from the slide, there are 4 questions that we use, and each question has answer of yes and no. So each answer will lead whether the step or process of the sausage production is CCP or not CCP. Okay, next we will talk about HACCP plan summary. So in this HACCP plan summary, we will talk about CCP critical limits, monitoring procedure, corrective action, records, and verification. So from HACCP plan, we found that there are 2 CCP. So the first CCP baking. The significant hazard of baking is biological hazard, that is microbial growth of surviving microorganism under low temperature. So the critical limit for the hazard for the CCP is baking temperature minimum 55 degrees Celsius for 40 minutes. The monitoring procedure for the CCP is baking temperature and baking time using a thermometer and timer for each batch by cooking operator and QC supervisor. So the corrective action that used for this CCP is check thermometer performance and check timer performance and rebaking, continue baking until 55 degrees Celsius for 40 minutes. So the record is baking temperature and time records, calibration records, and personal training records. The verification of this QA manager to verify baking temperature and the time record. Calibration temperature gauge yearly and lab test for finished product. Okay, so for the second CCP that we found from the hazard plan is storage. The significant hazard is biological hazard, the growth of surviving microorganism under low temperature. The critical limit for the CCP is storage room temperature must be minimum negative 18 degrees Celsius. The monitoring procedure is to store the product under right temperature by install thermostat in the storage room. Depends on thermostat lifespan by QC supervisor and storage operator. So the corrective action that we use for the CCP, by using the thermostat, keep the storage temperature under negative 18 degrees Celsius. So daily inspect the temperature at the thermostat at its performance. The records for the CCP is product storage document, calibration record, and corrective action record. The verification for this QA manager to verify the temperature of storage, daily verification of monitoring and corrective action procedure.
Lastly is conclusion. The sausage processing and production companies represent a very large industry in the Malaysia and countries around the world, particularly and Europe. The second point is sausage is one of the oldest forms of processed food going back 1500 BC in ancient China. Third point is there are the several processes listed in the flow of the manufacture of chicken sausage, which are: first is use raw chicken breast as a starter to make chicken sausage. Second thing is grinding the chicken breast and place some mixture while the process takes place below the temperature of 10 degrees Celsius. The next step is the cooling the sausage below the temperature of 0 until 4 degrees Celsius. Third is after completing each of the above process, then move the sausage for packaging and labeling. Last one is store sausage in the coolest part of the refrigerator or in the refrigerator's meat bins. Use fresh sausage stored in the refrigerator within 2 days of purchase. Freezer sausage in freezer safe, wrapped at or below 0 degree Fahrenheit. Now we going to the next point is every single hazard that occurs in each process of the chicken sausage. Among the hazard that we can know are biological, physical and chemical. Next point is show how to overcome each hazard, and we can find out the CCP step that occur in each of the process. Lastly, for the conclusion is the raw materials used in chicken sausage production were highly safe, thus the final product was also highly safe due to application of HACCP system. Like implementation of HACCP system is necessary to produce a final safe food product. That's all from us. Thank you.